Thank you, everybody, for joining. When Tim and Tri BC invited me to do this, and they just said, "Wow, like the topic is long distance," I was like, "Well, where am I going to begin and where am I going to end?" Because there's so much to talk about. And so, what I'm planning to do, and we've got a Q&A at the end of this, but what I'm planning to do tonight is really put long distance triathlon and also just the long distance lifestyle or lifestyle as an endurance athlete in context. So no matter where you're at in your journey of training and racing, I know that what we're going to talk about tonight is going to resonate with you, whether you've already been in it for a number of years or whether you're thinking about getting more into it after being, maybe not even doing a triathlon, but also maybe even just dabbling in the super sprints and Olympic distances. So I want to really emphasize that at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is build capacity within you as an athlete and do that within the context of our already very busy lives. So please, if you've got some questions as we go along, I'm going to cover a lot, but I'm going to really highlight the most important considerations, but make notes if you have questions for me so I address them at the end. So let's just begin. And I'm not going to take too much time talking about my own background. If you want to talk about, Bright coaching and what I do with athletes, reach out to me. I'm extremely approachable. I have lots of people that I work with as well, other coaches and a whole team of people that surround what I do for athletes. So I'd love to hear what your story and goals are. But basically, I've been around. So as Tim mentioned in the introduction, I've been around the sport all of my life. As an athlete, now a full-time coach. It's all I do all day long, day in, day out. I work with athletes all over the world, many time zones, many stories, and I love it. It's a passion of mine, but it's also my career. And so that is our bread and butter in terms of how we deliver our services is work with individuals training as endurance athletes. And at the end of the day, our mission is to help athletes develop this lifestyle also within the context of their life. And that could mean, I work with people who have 4 kids and a huge career and relationships and a social life, and they're training for Ironman. That's a lot to ask. So we have to take that into consideration. And then I have other people who are just really using triathlon as a way to create purpose in their life, and they don't have as many responsibilities. And so this is really creating a community and structure to their everyday. So there's a spectrum there, and I really try to work with athletes to make it work for them. So while we do develop custom training plans for every individual, and really, that is our superpower, I believe. We also work with endurance teams. So I work with a huge cycling team out of Vancouver, Lotus Cycling, 120 members. And then I've worked with triathlon teams on a North American basis, people all over the world. So that's more of an advisory role as opposed to individual coaching, but it's nice to have a little bit of a team influence as well. So for those of you who may not know, I won't spend a lot of time here, but we've basically got 4 elements of triathlon. We've got the sprints and the Olympics, which are about 30 minutes to up to, we'll call it 4 hours. You've got the half Ironman, which I think is an incredible distance for people who have a lot of responsibility in their life, want to train for long distance, but maybe Ironman's a bit too much. Then you go to Ironman. Of course, we have up to 17 hours to complete that. And then you've got Ultraman, which is a multi-day event. So, you can go down, you can continue to go down into the Decaman, et cetera. But those are pretty much the 4 categories. So I'm just going to land us here in terms of what I believe are the critical ingredients to long distance. And so no matter where you're at, I just want you to look at this screen and ask yourself if you are lacking or thriving in all of these areas. So no matter where you are, do you have a plan, a swim, bike, run plan? Do you have a plan? If you don't, I encourage you to seek some way to do it, whether it's you that is developing one or whether you're seeking counsel to develop a plan. You need a plan. We're going to get to that in a second in terms of how to plan a plan, but that's very important. Next, are you following some kind of strength program? And I know some of the people who are joining today, and I know they're all using a strength program, whether I'm prescribing it or they're working with a trainer. It's, to me, one of the most fundamental aspects of endurance training. We're going to talk more about strength as well. Of course, you guys also heard from Gina Grain earlier in this series, I do most of my work with Gina Grain. Almost all of my athletes will consult with Gina if they don't have somebody that they're already working with. And she emphasized the importance of strength, mobility for good functional movement. So she and I are very much aligned. Supportive nutrition habits. Nutrition is the foundation, obviously, fueling, but it's one thing to have nutrition for everyday life and wellness. It's one thing to have fueling and nutrition dialed for, the shorter distances. But when you get to that half Ironman distances, it will literally make or break your career. Sleep, of course, everybody knows how important adequate sleep is, sleep hygiene, appropriate amount of sleep, protecting your sleep. And then finally, to have a dynamic approach, which goes back to having a plan. Life is not a spreadsheet. You don't know when you're going to get sick. You don't know when your kids are going to need you. You don't know when a meeting is going to pop up. So training can't just live on a spreadsheet, and you need to be, a slave to that. You need to be able to have a dynamic approach. It's the only way to be successful and have longevity in the sport. So these are the ingredients, I believe, to long distance, not only a one-off, but also a lifestyle as well as an endurance athlete. So I always think about thriving or surviving, because I find so many people are just in survival mode, and it's not a good place to be, to just feel like every day you're just chasing, and it's like your cup is overflowing all of the time. Your bathtub there's no security drain. You're just overflowing. And I really, really encourage the athletes that I work with, the athletes that come into my, world, so to speak, whether I work with them directly or we just do a consultation. How can you figure out how to thrive in your life? That includes family. It includes your career. It includes time with your friends and so any other social situations you're in. It even includes some downtime. And then if you introduce training into your life, you're thriving in your training. And it's a real gift when people can, going on to my next point, zoom out before they zoom in. Like, how am I going to make this endurance lifestyle? How am I going to add all these hours of training, swimming, biking, running into my already abundant life and thrive? Like, how am I going to do that? So that's a major, major question to answer. And then stress load, like you've got to manage your global stress load, the emotional stress, the physical stress. If we're going through, relationship breakdowns, or your kids are struggling in school, or you've had something out with a friend or whatever, that's massive stress. And we cannot discount that when we're training for endurance sports. It's almost more stressful than a really intense bike session. So I really consider that when I'm working with athletes. And when all of this stuff comes up, we have to define what success means to us. And maybe, I get many athletes that call me or email me. They've never even done a triathlon. And they say, Christine, I want to qualify for world championships. They don't even own a bike yet. And they've already gone there because that's success to them. So I really encourage people to really refine and then re-refine as we get going what success actually means, given the context of life. So just to talk about training as a long distance athlete let's just talk about that for a second. You can see obviously the image is a couple of people hunched over, and we could just look at that and we can think like, wow, they had like an awesome run and they're just kind of like a little wiped out, or like, whoo, they're burned out. And obviously we're after the fact having amazing training sessions and a little wiped out, but not burned out. So this screen here, I want you to also just take a look at it. So this is what happens, I see all the time from a textbook approach. So the common approach to training for a long distance event, and we're talking triathlon here tonight, but let's just call it long distance. Let's just call it a big endurance, anything that's over, we'll just say 6 hours. So the common approach is that you've got a fixed training plan. So it's like, whether you're working with a coach or not, but you do all of these sessions on these particular days and this intensity, and this is the way it is. That's very, very, very common. And then that leads to chasing hours that we don't have. That happens all the time. Like I said earlier, your cup overflows, you're chasing, 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 and then you arrive at the pool and you forgot your bathing suit, right? Because you just didn't have your marbles all together. And then every week you need to have that run, that swim, that bike. There's no diversity. You're just always doing what the textbook said. And then with that comes this pass fail. So it's like, you checked the box, you did it because it was on the fixed training program, and you're just a slave to this approach, and there's just no room to breathe. And then the other thing that happens is, and this is, I mean, the buzzword right now is zone 2 training. Everybody's doing zone 2 training because it's like the be all end all. And I believe, of course, you've got to have a base in your body in your physiology with an aerobic base, but it can also lead to a lot of flatness. It can also lead to a lot of burnout. And for time-starved athletes that have jobs and kids and any kind of life outside of sport, if all you're doing is zone 2, you're only going to get zone 2. So there needs to be some kind of variety in your training, especially for time-starved athletes. Then the last 2 points are very important, and it's with caution, I'm going to say these 2 things, but the first one is this obsession with short-term race builds. And so, some people, they'll be racing for a half Ironman or an Ironman, and they absolutely obsess about getting so specific about their training, instead of realizing that they're doing this within the context of their life. They're not on an Olympic cycle. They're not getting paid to do this. And really what matters is the consistency of showing up. Honestly, the consistency of doing your training. It's not to say you don't sometimes need to be specific, but if you obsess over the specificity, you will turn yourself inside out. And we're going to talk more about that later as well. And then finally, focus. So I believe our cognitive bandwidth to train is very fragile. And if I asked every athlete to show up 100% for every single session, they would burn out. Some sessions need to be a little bit soul fulfilling. They need to be a little bit just do an easy run. They need to just go for a coffee ride. So, and just let your mind just be okay with that. In fact, don't even look at your metrics. Just go for a ride or a swim in the ocean or whatever it is. And that'll really, really help with your enjoyment of the process. So this is what I like to say. These 7 slides are like, what I like to say is the common approach. So let's just take a look now at the newer approach, we'll call it. So this is where, we're a little bit more dynamic, as opposed to fixed. So we're focused on our consistency. And I'm not saying consistency over a week. I'm saying consistency over weeks or months where it's not perfect, but you're continuing to do your training. You're layering on the brick upon brick. And with that comes this amplified experience in health, in sport, and in life, like you're thriving in your sport and your training because you've created capacity for your health, your sport, and your life. And then with that comes you're able to sustain it because you've given yourself room. You're not being, fixed with it. You're actually removing what I call the fatigue fog because you've created space in your life to continue to be a good partner to whoever you're with, be a good friend, be a good, work colleague, and also be a thriving athlete. You've considered the fun factor, like if this isn't fun, then I don't know why we're doing it, because it is truly an extracurricular activity, I would say, for most of you. And then I also believe that sport and performance, we've got a lot going on in our lives, and with technology and social media and everything, sports can be a beautiful pressure release valve on life, where you're just like, oh, I was so busy today at work and I went out for my run after work and I just felt so much better. Like all that's going to be there when you come back. And so it can be a nice stress reliever. And then we can also manage life. I mean, listen, COVID may have been one of the best things that happened to me as a coach, because this was like a major change in the way we operated, and we just managed it, and we actually used training to create structure in our lives, and we ebbed through that, and races started coming back, and we flowed. So, when athletes go through certain things in their lives, they have kids, they change jobs, doesn't mean training needs to stop at all. We just ebb and flow. We maintain that health and wellness is our fundamental, and we can use sport and triathlon specifically. You've got 3 sports to ebb and flow in life. So that's kind of the newer approach. So this expression I want you to all really take in, and if you want, you can try to challenge me on it, but under no circumstances is this not correct, where we say stress plus rest equals growth. You need stress to grow, but you need rest. You need rest to grow, but you need stress. So no matter what, stress plus rest equals growth. And sometimes when you just think about that alone, it simplifies everything that you're doing. But so how much of both? Well, that depends on the athlete. But I want to just go back to the last 2 slides. And so the common approach is, as we mentioned, fixed. And then the newer approach is a little bit more pliable. And so I just want to also say, it's not about doing less, and it's not about having an easier path. It's just within the context of life. And it's really an optimization challenge as opposed to an optimal challenge, right? There is optimal, but sometimes we can't do optimal. So we just need to optimize what's possible for us. And so stress, we don't even need to go too deep on this, but I'm just going to, bring it out in case you've forgotten, or you're feeling stressed right now and you're not even sure why. Well, maybe it's training. Maybe you're training too much. Maybe you're not getting enough sleep. Maybe you've got financial stresses on you. Maybe you're traveling a lot for work. Maybe nutrition isn't where it could be. Maybe something's going on inside of you that's not really clicking or working really well. Maybe there's family stress, maybe work, maybe illness, all of these things. And they are massive factors that will affect your experience as an endurance athlete. So we have to take those into consideration. So at the end of the day, I mentioned this before too, at the very end of the day, what we're trying to do as endurance athletes is develop capacity. Like the more capacity. So if I said to somebody, go out and run 45 minutes, and they come back and they're like, whew, I'm just like totally exhausted. Well, maybe their capacity isn't very much. But if we build on top of that and we create enough rest for them to have adaptations, then they'll go out for 45 minutes and they'll be like, wow, I just felt amazing. I probably could have ran an hour. So that's an adaptation, and they won't crack. And so our mission is to be able to develop into highly moldable, anti-fragile, and adaptive athletes. And if you can do that as a long distance athlete, you will have tremendous success in this sport. And so, I really encourage, obviously, as my full-time focus is coaching, I really believe athletes who have some kind of advocate. It doesn't always have to be a formal relationship, but some kind of advocate that is guiding their training as they're preparing for long distance events and endurance. The accountability factor is huge, but also is the governance of your training and the seeking counsel when you're unsure, not knowing what your bandwidth is, not knowing when to rest. Having a coach actually follow and plan your training, I think it will really amplify your experience. Sharing the journey with other people, like it's so easy in this sport to operate as an island, but you will get so much more out if you can bring in your networks, and then to maintain perspective. It's so easy to get like into our minutia of what we're doing, and that specifically matters. But at the very end of the day, to create perspective and see what really matters will help you remain in the sport a long time. I could probably just do the whole presentation tonight on this screen, because I truly believe, maybe in a lot of other things, but these are the basics of long distance training. Whether you're a cyclist, a runner, a swimmer, or you're a triathlete, you're all things. But we need to have endurance. There's no question. We need to have strength. There's no question. Nutrition is an absolute non-negotiable. And with that, so is recovery. So if you look at all of these four, where are you at in all of these four? And if you're not sure, or you could do more of something, then I would really implore you and encourage you to go deep into that and try to even out these four pillars. You've got your endurance, you've got your strength, you understand nutrition and fueling, right? Nutrition is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Fueling is how you're fueling your actual activities and your recovery fuel. A little different there. And then how are you recovering from your sessions, which can include nutrition. So what I'm not going to give you tonight is like the answer to Ironman performance, but I'm going to give you some rooted comments, and there's more to come. And again, if you're making questions, please list out the detail, because we're not getting too detailed tonight. But I want to say these four things just in terms of performance. So if you're getting up to do, let's just call long distance triathlon for right now, half Ironman, Ironman distance. It is unquestionably a game of pacing and nutrition, unquestionably. So if pacing goes wrong, your nutrition is for sure going to go wrong. If you go out too hard on the bike or the run, your gut will shut down and you won't be able to fuel. If you don't fuel, you won't be able to pace. So it's a game of pacing and nutrition. You must get them right. Different than even though for cycling, a purist, as cycling alone, yes, pacing and nutrition is very much a factor, but you're not running off the bike. So when you add a marathon or a half marathon off the bike, pacing and nutrition is categorically the most important factor. With that comes patience and courage. Having the courage to know thyself, to pace appropriately, is very important. And to be patient enough to see yourself out to the last few, maybe kilometers of an event, is a tall order for a lot of people. Long distance performance is also rooted in strength, followed by endurance. And long distance performance is obviously, I believe, a lifestyle that is fully integrated into an already abundant life. One cannot exist on its own. If you have any kind of abundance in your life, this lifestyle needs to be integrated into it, as opposed to something that's living on its own. Okay, so let's go on. So quick tips here. I mean, we could go into each of these ones, and if you're making notes, or maybe this presentation is going to be shared with you, let's just go into them. And I'm going to top line them so that we don't spend too much time here, but let's just go into my tips for training long distance. So training, I really believe run frequency very often trumps, sorry to use that word, is better than always just doing long runs. I know in our heads we think, oh, we should really be, either doing repeats at the track or really long runs because you think you're doing long distance. But the body becomes durable with frequency. So I believe run frequency, especially for time-starved athletes, is really a gold nugget. How you manage your bricks can also layer on top a little bit more capacity building, or I also even think some people who are really busy, they're training for an Ironman. They could do 2 hours in the morning on the bike, and maybe they could do 90 minutes in the evening, depending on the circumstance. Or maybe, for example, some marathoners that I've worked with, sometimes they can't actually do a long run because their body breaks down. Maybe we do a really hard bike and then we layer on a moderate run. So how you use brick workouts can be really advantageous to your training and optimize your time. Strength, of course. I'm just going to keep coming back to strength. Gina knows I'm such an advocate of having strength, speaking from also experience. And swim intensity. I truly believe to leverage your swim intensity is important. You gain so much fitness. It's non-weight bearing. You can go hard and recover in the water and gain a huge amount of fitness from swimming. So those 4 tips. Habits. Okay. Fuel after every session. Get your cortisone levels down after you've done a stressful session. I don't care if it's just a little bit of something. As soon as you finish your session, fuel. How easy it is to finish the session and then forget to fuel, which I don't understand, because that's the first thing I do right after. But I really encourage athletes to to reduce their stress flowing hormones with a little bit of fuel. Hydration. There's so much information now about hydration and electrolytes. So important to get into the habit of keeping your body hydrated throughout the day. Fueling throughout the day. Fueling not only for the next session, recovering from a session, and just maintaining your energy. It will also help you show up in other areas of your life and prioritize sleep. So those are some of the habits to get into. Like if you just did those alone, a lot of other things would fall into place. And then managing yourself, managing your training, managing the load that comes on top of you really is about knowing when to show up. So if you know you've got a hard session coming up, a challenging session, maybe you want to show up. Maybe you want to clear the clutter. Maybe you don't want to check your phone as much. Maybe you don't want to, have all of that stimulus going on. Maybe you want to kind of like open yourself up to show up. But maybe if you just have an easy spin with some friends, you don't have to be so alert, so on it, so recovered. Maybe you don't have to show up so much. So know when to manage yourself. Know how to optimize the day. So if you look at your day and you're trying to bring your energy to what it's demanded on you. So you need some energy for your training, you need some energy for your friends or family, you need some energy for your work, you need some energy for your dog to walk or whatever. How do you optimize your day? I will say a lot of athletes will wake up in the morning a little too early for their alarm and think, oh, I'll do the bike ride later. But then later comes and they didn't fuel, they didn't hydrate, and now work is piling up and the session doesn't get done. So obviously they haven't been able to optimize their day or their energy. To maintain perspective, right? Zoom out before you zoom in, and really make sure you figure out how to fill up your soul. Sometimes I even just prescribe, this is a soul fulfilling run. This is a soul fulfilling ride. So manage your energy accordingly. Okay. So, one question that I often ask athletes doing long distance events is when the race is over and you've crossed the finish line, and I'm standing there and I'm looking at you and I'm saying, oh my gosh, tell me about your race. How would you define that? How would you define success? And that's a tricky question, because there's so many things that can go into defining success. And the one thing that I want to zoom in on here is, and we're talking long distance. Of course, how did you manage yourself throughout the day? How did you manage your nutrition? How did you manage your mindset? But at the very end of the day, I encourage athletes to define success based on the back half of the run. So if you're doing an Ironman, you've got 42 kilometers to run off the bike, and you got to 10 kilometers into the run, and now you're walking the rest of the marathon, I wouldn't consider that to be a successful day. I would consider that to be a day to learn from. And the next time, go out, how can we get you to a little bit further into the marathon to minimize the potential of walking? But if you cross the finish line and you were like thriving because you actually ran the back half of either the half marathon or the full marathon, because you managed yourself early, you fueled, you were patient, you had the courage to be patient, you looked after yourself throughout the day, and by the time you got to that half marathon point or even 30 kilometers into the run, it's not to say it's not going to get hard. It's going to get super challenging. But if all you had to do was to push yourself that last 12 kilometers and still run, because you fueled, because you paced, because you managed yourself, because you looked after yourself, that is an extremely successful day. And notice, I'm not even talking about speed. I'm not talking about any kind of outcome. I'm not even talking about time. I don't care if you qualify. I don't care if any of that. I just care that you were actually running the last half. Okay, we're going to go through these quickly because everybody might have questions and these might answer you, but these are kind of my fundamentals. How many months or years does it take to prepare for an Ironman? I will say for new people, I probably wouldn't say doing an Ironman anything sooner than at least 8 months. And that's on the very short end. I would much prefer somebody go into an Ironman with a full year preparation. Someone comes to me with experience, we can kind of, negotiate a little bit. but I truly believe that you need minimum 8 months. How many hours a week? That is so specific to the individual. But for an Ironman, I don't think you're looking at much less than 10, maybe 12. And for a half Ironman, you're not looking at much less than 8 hours a week. Again, these are general statements, but it gives you an idea. And we can ebb and flow if you've got, some time off work, you're going on a training camp, you're going on vacation, you have the luxury to train, we can increase the hours. How do you plan for fueling and hydration? That's a very big question and something that you need to dive into. Something we're not going to get into because I could just do the whole presentation on that, but that is so important. What gear do you need? Do you need a triathlon bike? Depends. What's your budget? Is it nice? There's some nice to have, there's some essentials, and then there's some nice things to have. So you must know everything you need given the context of your budget, the race you're doing, your experience. Maybe this year you're doing it all on a road bike and next year you'll invest in a triathlon bike. It's your circumstance. Never underestimate logistics, especially for triathlon. There's incredible logistics when you add in swimming, when you add in biking, and when you add in running. So, and travel logistics too. And I always encourage athletes to try and figure out the logistics for the sole reason that their mind can relax and they're organized for what they're getting ready for. Self-belief. I mean, I actually believe that one of the most impactful benefits of performance and improvements and gaining is self-belief. If you believe in the program you're following, if you trust it, if you believe in yourself, that's maybe more important than the repeats you're going to do at the track or not do at the track. Hugely important. How do you include your support network? How do you include them in the journey? How do you make it so that they're not like, oh, she's always out training, or oh, she's always tired, or he, or whatever? How do you include them so they feel a part of your journey? How do you include them so they celebrate you? How do you include them so they want to celebrate you? All of those things are so important. I also believe that pegs and sand are important. What do I mean by that? I mean, let's just say here we are, March, an athlete might come to me and say, I want to do an Ironman next summer. And I say, okay, well, let's start tomorrow and train for next summer. That's way too long. We need to be putting in pegs along the way of little things to look forward to. It could be little local races. It could maybe even be a destination race. It could maybe even be a race where you're going to do your Ironman. But you just need to have little pegs in the sand along the way, a little bit just for like mental releases, but also maybe it's a benchmark. Maybe you want to see where you're at with something, multiple reasons why we do that. And lastly, metrics. I mean, some people love metrics to the point where it almost is like they couldn't even imagine doing a ride without their power meter. And some people have no idea what a watt is. And I believe that if you're going to perform at a long distance, you have to have some relationship with your metrics. There's heart rate, there's cadence, there's speed, there's pace, there's power. All of these things have a role in our training and on our race execution. So how do you use your metrics? And if you're not sure, this is where either a coach can come in or you educate yourself on what the metrics is all about. They're there as a tool as opposed to something to judge yourself. Very important. So execution is your everything. To be able to execute means that you're putting your practice into performance. And doesn't mean you have to necessarily nail your execution every time, but you need an execution plan. And so how do we do that? You have to understand what you're doing in training. Like if you've been training for 8 months and then a race kind of comes along and I say to you, okay, so what pace do you think you can hold on the run? Or what power do you think you can hold on the bike? And you look at me like I'm crazy. Well, but you've just been training for 8 months. So do you understand what was going on for you? And so that's really important for you to kind of have to be engaged in the process. So come the race, you could say, well, yeah, every time, I did those repeats, I guess I was holding around 150 watts and I could digest my food and it seemed like it was not all day pace. Okay, so let's start there. At least we have to have a starting point to be able to plan how you're going to execute. I always say to athletes, just imagine, like, close your eyes and have this white canvas and your paintbrushes, and you're just going to start painting on your canvas in terms of what your performance, what do you want it to look like? It can be playful and fun. It could just be words that mean something to you. It could have some kind of flow to it. It could be your family standing at the finish line. Like, what is your picture for the day? I think it's so important to have a theme, a mantra, a mission, your own painting, your own view. And that alone can carry you throughout the day. And trust me, you live a whole lifetime of emotions in an Ironman. So once you built your plan for the execution, now you have a plan, and now you can settle into that. And it's not that your plan is so set in stone that you can't deviate from it, but it's a plan that you can say, okay, this is what I plan to do. I might need to pivot. I might need to navigate a little bit because things come up that are beyond my control, but at least I have some kind of framework to work towards. So important. Talked about this on the last screen, the back half mindset. It's like, how am I going to get to the back half of the marathon, the back half of the half marathon, the last day of an ultra, whatever it is, still performing, still in run mode, still moving forward. And that is your ultimate challenge. So I ask athletes, do you think 400s on the track repeat are really going to help you in an Ironman in the back half if you haven't figured out your nutrition, your pacing strategy, your mindset, your gear? Probably not. So really focus. Strength will, nutrition will, having an endurance base in your fitness will, good recovery plan will, good sleep will, but I don't know sometimes if all those things you think matter actually matter to what a great execution is all about. Transitions, some people get a little bit obsessed with transitions, but they're just a quick, between. Of course, you want to be efficient. You want to be able to come out of the swim, go through your gear that you actually wrote about in your execution plan, how that's all going to work, but they're not going to make or break. So if you're doing an Ironman and you think, wow, I really need to have fast transitions, no. We're really focused on you getting through the disciplines as efficiently and economically as possible. And ideally, you're also running the back half of the marathon. It's not your transitions that matter the most. They matter, but not the most. And how do you look after yourself throughout the day? So how do you keep your body temperature cool? How do you hold all your nutrition? How do you manage your thoughts going through your mind? How do you manage your temperature change? How do you look after yourself all day? And if you're able to look after yourself throughout the day, you will have an incredibly successful race. Okay, this is the last slide. So I'm just really going to go back just because I wanted so imprinted. So to have a journey that you feel is successful, I truly believe you need some kind of you need an advocate, coach, whatever you want to call it, mentor. You need a system of accountability. Everybody does, by the way, not just you, unique. Everybody needs that kind of structure in their life in order to be productive. And I also encourage you to have a perspective that is based on a long-term view and not just, oh, I'm doing this race and then I'll get on with my life. Have longevity as your view. Enjoy the process along the way and nail your basics. So make sure you've got the endurance to go long. Make sure you've got the strength to keep an upright posture late in the game and in the run. Make sure you understand what fueling and nutrition is all about, and make sure you're recovering from all of this. So that's what I have for you this evening.